Donald Trump just gave Iran 48 hours. It's 48 hours to open the Strait of Hormuz, or he's going to obliterate their power grid, plunge a nation of 90 million people into complete darkness, and Iran fire back. They said if one power plant gets hit, every energy facility, every desalination plant, every piece of American infrastructure in that region is a target. Now, the mainstream media is going to give you surface level. They're going to give you the geopolitical chess match. They're going to give you the military analysts, the retired generals. What they're not going to give you is the deeper truth underneath all of this, the spiritual reality, the pattern that keeps repeating itself throughout history, and what that actually means for you sitting at home right now. That's exactly what we're going to do today. Let's get into it.
President Donald Trump is threatening an enormous attack on Iran's energy infrastructure if Tehran doesn't allow free navigation through the strategic Strait of Hormuz.
Okay, so right out the gate, CNN, notice the framing, threatening, enormous attack. They're already painting Trump as the aggressor before we even understand the full context of what really is happening. Now look, I'm not going to sit here and be a Trump cheerleader, but I'm also not going to sit here and let the narrative get run on me. Strait of Hormuz is one of the most critical choke points on the entire planet. We're talking about 20% of the world's oil supply passing through the strait. If Iran closes it, and they've been disrupting it, you're not just talking about the Middle East problem here. You're talking about energy prices spiking globally. You're talking about inflation hitting working class people in America harder than it already is. So when they frame it as Trump just being reckless, aggressive, ask yourself, who benefits from that framing? Who benefits from you seeing this as Trump, the warmonger, rather than a genuine geopolitical crisis that's been building for decades? The narrative is always the first weapon, always.
Iran, for its part, coming out with a statement today saying that all vessels can pass through the Strait of Hormuz as long as they're not linked to what they say is the enemy. So we're talking about US and Israeli linked vessels. Now, how they apply that rule remains to be seen. We've heard just another vessel was impacted by an unknown projectile just off the coast here in the UAE in Sharjah. So we're seeing around 22 vessels that have already been impacted.
So Iran says, sure, ships can pass as long as they're not American or Israeli linked. And they want ships to coordinate with Iran for security guarantees. You understand what that means? That means Iran wants to be the gatekeeper. They want to be the toll booth on one of the most important waterways in the world. It's not freedom of navigation. That's control. That's leverage. It's Iran saying, you want to move through here? You come through us first. And then the CNN analyst says something that you want to catch. Watch this out.
You know, Iran is not a democracy. I mean, the ruling regime can absorb a lot of pain on behalf of its public in a way that is just harder for a democracy to do.
Now, that is an honest moment, because what he's saying is the Iranian regime doesn't care about its people suffering. They can take a hit. They can absorb the pain because they're not accountable to the people the way that a democracy is supposed to be. Well, what I want you to sit with is the same dynamic exists in every corrupt empire throughout history. People at the top insulate themselves from the consequences of their decisions while the people at the bottom absorb all the pain. It's not just Iran. It's the pattern of every nation that's walked away from righteousness and into corruption.
John, an extremely tough-worded ultimatum from President Trump to Iran, and that ultimatum has a clock ticking. 48 hours to open the Strait of Hormuz completely for commercial traffic, or the U.S. would, in President Trump's words, obliterate power plants across Iran, potentially plunging the nation of 90 million people into complete darkness. Now, with the timing, that would be fewer than 30 hours remaining for Iran to take those steps. Iran, though, posturing defiance, no sign of taking any steps to open that. The reverse, saying they would close the straits entirely if President Trump follows through and begins attacking power plants in Iran. They said they would also attack U.S. assets in the region. Here's
90 million people. Let that land for a second. 90 million people potentially without power, without water, without heat, without hospitals functioning. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying Iran's leadership doesn't deserve consequences. They've been funding terrorism. They've been destabilizing the entire region. They've been marching towards a nuclear weapon for years. The regime is wicked. Full stop. But we have to be honest about what the war actually cost, because the people who make these decisions, the politicians, the generals, the defense contractors, they don't pay the price. The 90 million civilians pay the price. The soldiers on both sides pay the price. The working class people in America who are going to see gas prices spike pay the price. The people at the top never pay the price. And that's part of this conversation that nobody in the mainstream media wants to have.
چنانچه زیرساخت‌های سوخت.
If Iran's fuel and energy infrastructure is targeted by the enemy, all energy, information technology, and desalination infrastructure belonging to America and the regime in the region will be targeted.
So Iran is threatening to take out desalination plants. You know what desalination plants do? They turn salt water into drinking water. In the Gulf region, Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, those plants are how millions of people survive. Iran is essentially threatening to cut off the drinking water supply for millions of people in the region. This is what escalation looks like. This is what happens when nations operate without any moral anchor. When power is the only currency, when there's no fear of God, there's no restraint. None. Listen to what preacher has to say.
You need to hate sin. And you need to blame it for the damage, the destruction it has done to humanity and is doing right now. It is the source of all humanity's troubles. Not governments, not inequities, not all those things are byproducts of sin. We live in a Genesis 3 world.
That right there, that's the framework you need to understand when you're watching the news. Iran's leadership isn't threatening to cut off drinking water for millions of people because of a policy disagreement. They're doing it because sin, unchecked, unrestrained, unrepentant sin at the level of national leadership produces exactly this kind of fruit. Reckless, destructive, willing to harm innocent people to protect power. And the same is true on every side of this conflict. When nations abandon God, when they operate purely from a place of pride, power, self-interest, this is what you get. You get countries threaten to obliterate each other. You get 90 million civilians caught in the crossfire of decisions made by people who never have to feel the consequences.
As this back and forth takes place, Iran has managed to fire 2 long-range missiles at U.S. and U.K. military positions on the island of Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. Neither missile hit its target, but the range surprised many people, more than 2,000 miles striking from Tehran out into the Indian Ocean. John?
Now, this is the part that should have everybody paying attention. Because up until now, a lot of people thought Iran's missile capability was largely regional. Like Middle East range. Maybe hitting Israel. Maybe hitting Saudi Arabia. But 2,500 miles into the Indian Ocean, that changes the entire threat assessment.
Iran has been marching towards an ICBM. They've hidden some of that development under a so-called space program. I don't think anybody expects to see any Iranian astronauts on the moon, but that's what they've been hiding their booster production in contravention of sanctions behind for some years. They have developed a reentry capability with these intermediate range missiles, and all you have to do is marry up the two with a nuclear warhead.
No doubt they had an awful lot of help from the North Koreans and from China in developing this weaponry, right?
China. There it is. Because this was never just about Iran. This is about a broader realignment of global power. China and North Korea helping Iran develop missile technology that can reach Europe and potentially beyond. Russia backing Iran's position in the region. You're watching the formation of a counter-alliance to the Western powers happening in real time. And here's what I want you to understand, that this didn't happen overnight. This has been building for decades. While America was busy exporting democracy at the barrel of a gun in Iraq and Afghanistan, while we were spending trillions of dollars on wars that made the defense contractors rich and left working class Americans with nothing, while all that was happening, while China was building, Russia was rebuilding, Iran was developing, and now we are here. The post-World War II international rules-based order, the idea that America could just be the world's policeman indefinitely, is cracking. And what comes next is the question nobody has a clean answer to.
They were 2 weeks away from having 90% enriched uranium to make 10 bombs. They've got missiles that go 4,000 kilometers. We're not going to live that way anymore. So here's what I tell President Trump. Keep it up for a few more weeks. Take Carg Island, where all of the resources they have to produce oil. Control that island. Let this regime die on a vine.
Lindsey Graham, every single time there's a conflict anywhere in the world, Lindsey Graham is right there at the microphone telling you to escalate, to go further, to take more, to control more. And I want to ask you a simple question. Who benefits from taking Carg Island? Who benefits from controlling Iran's oil production? Because it's not the American working class. It's not the people paying $20 a gallon at the pump. It's not the soldiers who are going to have to fight and die to take and hold that island. It's the same people who always benefit from these wars. The defense contractors, the oil interests, the financial institutions that fund both sides of every conflict. This is the military-industrial complex operating in plain sight, calling it patriotism. And look, I'm not sitting here saying Iran isn't a genuine threat. They are. But there's a difference between protecting American interests and protecting the financial interests of a small group of people who profit from perpetual war. And Lindsey Graham has never once in his career shown me that he knows the difference. Now here's what Scripture tells us about this pattern. I want you to hear this because this is not abstract theology. It's the most practical framework you can have for understanding what you're watching right now. Every empire in history has believed it was righteous. Every empire has told itself a story about why wars were just, why conquests were necessary, why people it was destroying deserved it. Babylon told that story. Rome told that story. The British Empire told that story. And America has been telling that story ever since at least the Iraq War. I heard once put plainly, powerful nations frequently believe they are righteous while exporting corruption, domination, confusion, and false freedom. That's the diagnosis. That's what we're watching. And the Bible is clear about what happens to nations that operate from that place of unchecked pride. Pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. That's not a metaphor. That's a pattern. That's a law of history, and it applies to Iran. It applies to America. It applies to every nation that puts its own power above the fear of God. Are we discerning enough to see through that narrative? Are we spiritually grounded enough to not get swept up in the war fever? Are we wise enough to understand that the people pushing the hardest for escalation are almost never the ones who will pay the price?
Speaking to a lot of corporates, they're really worried about what it's going to do to earnings down the line. And this is why we're starting to see a lot of concern coming through, and even in the markets and the equities.
And there it is. The corporate world is worried about earnings. Not the 90 million Iranians who might lose power. Not the soldiers on both sides. Not about the working class Americans who are going to fill this at the gas pump and at the grocery store. We're worried about earnings. This is the world we live in. This is the system we operate inside of. And until we're honest about that, until we are willing to name it clearly, we're going to keep getting played. The Strait of Hormuz, the crisis is real. The threat of Iran is real. But the people are going to profit from whatever happens next, whether it's war or negotiated settlement. They're already positioned. They were positioned before the first missile was fired. They're always positioned because they write the policy. They fund the politicians. The media that frames the narrative, they own it. And your job, our job, is to see through it. Not to be paralyzed by it, not to fall for the cynicism, but it's to see clearly so that we can respond wisely. So here's where we land. Trump's ultimatum to Iran is real. The threat of escalation is real. The possibility that this becomes something much larger than a regional conflict is real. Iran firing 2,500-mile missiles into the Indian Ocean tells you everything you need to know about where their capabilities are and where their intentions are pointed. What I need you to hold on to, the mainstream media is only going to give you the surface. They're going to give you the retired generals and the geopolitical analysts and the talking heads, and some of what they say will be accurate. But they're not going to give you the deeper question. They're not going to ask who benefits. They're not going to connect this to the broader pattern of corruption and the spiritual reality underneath all of it. That's what I do here. I'm not here to tell you which side to root for. I'm here to help you see clearly, to think deeply, to understand what's happening beneath the surface morally, spiritually, geopolitically, because the world is not going to make sense to you if you are only watching the news. The world only starts to make sense when you understand that we live in a Genesis 3 world, that sin at the individual level and at the national level produces exactly the kind of fruit we're watching play out on the world stage right now. Nations threatening to obliterate each other, civilians caught in the crossfire, war hawks calling for more escalation, defense contractors getting rich, working class people paying a price. This is what it looks like when the fear of God is absent from power. Amen.